scholar. His training is as a historian, and he's written several books that are of significant importance. You can kind of divide his books a little bit in half. The scholarly side is one thing, and I'll say just a little bit about that. One of your most important scholarly books, of course, would be on Advent and the history and meaning and theology of Advent. There are some other really wonderful books he did that are scholarly, where he edited compilations in honor of various liturgical theologians that are also really, really important. You can find all of those online. His other half of his books tend to be more, I don't know if pastoral is the right word, they're written to a broader audience. Clergy are a part of that audience. And one of which I'm going to highlight, and I'll never forget it, and I've not told you this, even though we've been together this weekend, but when he wrote a book when he was the Bishop of Atlanta in probably about 2004, do you all remember Bishop Gene Robinson? And just remember all that came. If you don't remember, he was the first openly gay bishop to be elected in the Anglican Communion. Openly is the word that should be underlined, not the first gay bishop in the Communion. But the first openly gay, and that election was significant, obviously, for the Episcopal Church and for the Anglican Communion. At the time, I was a rector of a church in Decatur, Alabama, and to say that was significant for that diocese is an understatement. And it was significant for all of us in various sorts of ways. It was a time of rejoicing for many, a time of confusion for some, and all sorts of things were going on that you'll all remember, or many of you will remember. And Neil, as the Bishop of Atlanta, voted to support Gene's consecration, and that was a big deal as a Southern diocesan bishop. And he shortly thereafter wrote a book called This Far by Grace. And what I appreciated about it is a book about the inclusion of gay and lesbian persons in the Episcopal Church and in the Christian church more broadly. What was such a gift to me, my instincts were there, my mind and heart were there already, so he didn't say anything I didn't believe. But it was just so refreshing to have one of our bishops be both gentle and clear and not wishy-washy. Just clear, and the clarity was a real gift, I think, to many of us, to mine the resources of our tradition and of Scripture, and to say, this is where we are, and this is why we are where we are, and let's be clear about that. And it really was that book, among many, many, many other things that were more important and more sacrificial, but that book fit with an overall pattern of the church becoming clear about our identity, which is also becoming clear about baptism. And you'll hear about that in the sermon. But all of that's to say, Neil, thank you for that moment and for so much else that you've done. I think Neil as a scholar will be remembered. Well, you're still with us, so yeah, Neil as a scholar is enjoyed as someone who knows a lot about liturgy and history. In many ways, I think the clergy would say his even greater gift is about what it means to be a community of human beings doing the best they can as the baptized people of God and receiving communion week by week. So a remarkable mind, a remarkable career, and I'm just really grateful to have somebody here who's meant a lot to me. I also want you to know, in some ways we benefit from Neil's teaching and presence in ways that you don't even realize, because Neil was Katie Pearson's professor for a couple of different classes and a significant influence on her. And I'll never forget when I was thinking about hiring Katie, calling Neil because he was a reference for Katie. And he said, you found the right person. And indeed, you all know we did. So Neil, there are many things for which we're grateful. November, this is a big week on the church's calendar, and not just because we're returning to the cathedral. It's a big week on the church's calendar because November 1st is All Saints' Day. November 2 is All Souls' Day. And then we've got the flexibility to observe, in addition to All Saints' Day, All Saints' Sunday, which we're observing today. So this what's in the air this week that perhaps should be in the air every week around here is that we join our voices with saints and angels, that we're the people you see in this room in the cathedral are not the only people present. So Neil, what I'd like to begin with is just if you'd tell us a little bit about this history, and then we'll get into some of the meaning of All Saints.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Dean. It's wonderful. Let me say at the beginning, it's wonderful to be here and to share this time, and the warmth and hospitality of St. John's has just been extraordinary, and I'm grateful to the Dean for his probably hyperbolic introduction, but nonetheless, he at one point spoke of certain sense of clarity. Well, now that I'm old, I can sort of wallow in confusion, and so that's what we're going to do today, is wallow in confusion. But the Dean has asked about just to give you a little snippet of the history and background of All Saints, which is frankly a rather complex history as the feasts of the Church go. It didn't spring forth one afternoon, and sort of it's been that way ever since. It has gone through a fairly significant evolution. But I think the first thing is always to say that, the earliest followers of Jesus were, the whole pattern there, the whole emphasis, the whole, what they thought of and saw first was his death and resurrection, and what the death and resurrection of Jesus was going to mean. And so therefore, you can see already on the pages of the New Testament, but frankly, I think this was a reality before the New Testament was written, or certainly the New Testament was finished, that the earliest people of God had this fascination about death and resurrection. And the death of a believer meant something, not just to that believer and maybe to the immediate family, but to the community of faith. This was this is something that had a reach, if you will, and then the promise of resurrection in terms of the life of believers meant something pretty profound as well. And then, of course, that sort of the ante, if you will, gets upped. Pardon the syntax of that. That's why we have editors, Anyway, but because Jesus was, in some sense, because it was death and resurrection. What is a martyr? Well, a martyr is a person who gives witness to the death and resurrection of Jesus even unto death, which is to say they are prepared to die for their witness to the death and resurrection of Jesus. And some people would say for the faith, which is true at a particular kind of level, but I always want to phrase that in terms of particular witness to the death and resurrection of Jesus. Because if we are buried with him in a death like his, we will be risen with him in a resurrection like his, and this sort of Paschal pattern develops very early in life that, how is it that we live as Christians? We die daily to sin and we rise daily to newness of life. And every day is an event of death and resurrection, in imitation of the death and resurrection of him to whom our lives give witness as his faithful followers. Okay, so this death and resurrection thing is there from the very beginning. And very early on, still in the first century, still in the pages of the New Testament, in those early decades thereafter, the martyrs really kind of come to the top of the heap. In other words, those who are willing to live their life in imitation of Jesus even unto death. I mean, not just in the daily walk and work of life, but even unto death, they are prepared to give that witness. And so they begin fairly quickly to have a kind of a special, what shall we say, status in the life of the community, and all kinds of things begin to develop. I mean, the community begins to go to their. Are we having trouble with the microphone?
A little bit, but I think we can still hear you. Okay. Yeah,
I'm sure you can hear me in the room. I can be heard in the cathedral if we have to be. But what happened were feasts began to develop at people's graves.
Yeah.
And you would go out, for example, to a martyr's grave on the anniversary of their martyrdom, on their birthday into heaven, in their natale into heaven. And that's even today, when we celebrate somebody in the calendar of the church, we're not celebrating their birthday, or we're not celebrating the day they did something special. We're celebrating the day they were born into heaven, which is to say the day they died. Okay, their heavenly birthday, if you will. All right, but the community would go out and they would have feasts at the graveside, and they would. Of course, a bunch of Christians, when we say feast, what's the first thing we do? Celebrate the Eucharist. Exactly. But what we also know is that there were deep and profound traditions in those communities that people would come to the feast of the Eucharist to celebrate the martyr's death, but they would be prepared with, in colloquial terms, a picnic basket.
Yeah.
And they would spread, for what we will in centuries later in the United States call a potluck supper at the graveyard, whatever. But why was that true? Well, think about it now. Christians, think about the relationship between meals and feasts.
Yeah.
We do it now. We have the Christmas Eucharist, but nearly all of you are going to do what? Have Christmas dinner, right? And perhaps some of you you'll do it with extended families, you'll do it with your neighborhood, you'll do it perhaps with the parish church, you'll do it with all kinds of different configurations, but there'll be a feast that goes with the Eucharistic feast. The same thing happens, we go through Holy Week, Maundy Thursday, and Good Friday, and Great Sabbath, and Easter Vigil, and Easter Day, and then Easter dinner, right? These two pieces go together, and they've gone together, forever. Anyway, so the martyrs there are the big piece.
Let's pause for a moment, and thank you. Dirk's going to switch out Neil.
Okay.
So let me say, as they're doing that, Neil and I've got 2 or 3 things to get through. Once we get through these opening questions, please, if you have a question, just raise your hand. If I don't see you, if you'll stand up, I'll definitely see you. And we'll welcome your questions throughout this presentation. And the same thing is true for those joining us online. If you'll just put your question in the chat or comments, and Tina will note that and will flag the question for me. And we welcome your questions. But back to these martyrs and this potluck.
To move this forward a little bit. Okay, so let me emphasize the importance of the martyrs in the first round. But there were also these other saints out there. There were people that we came in time to call confessors, which were people who also lived an exemplary life of witness to the death and resurrection of Jesus, but somehow or another they escaped death. That was not their lot, if you will. And then there were even other saints. Martyrs always get this in the early centuries, always get top billing, but there were others who gave witness that need not be forgotten, which is also part of how some of these feasts begin to fall into place. One of the early on in the 4th century, we begin to get development, however, of a particular feast. And then there's a variety of things, and I'm not going to get into all the details of dates and buildings and who was Pope when and all that kind of stuff, because A, you're not going to remember it, and B, you don't need to.
Yeah.
That's the stuff that kind of keeps me up at night, But needless to say, the sort of the first inklings we have of this are the very first ones are actually in a community where the bishop says to the community, on Friday of Easter week, we will remember the saints, the martyrs. We will remember those who have given particularly powerful witness to the death and resurrection of Jesus. And what's interesting about that is in those early centuries, if you were baptized at Easter, that didn't mean that classes were over. There were pre-baptismal catechesis, in other words, getting you ready for baptism. And then there was post-baptismal catechesis, which was to explain what happened to you. Because we can't tell you everything on the front end or you'll cut and run. And so we're going to invite you into this life, and we're going to tantalize you into this life. But there are certain things we're not going to tell you, like pledge cards. we're not going to tell you about that kind of stuff until afterwards. I don't think pledge cards was an issue then, but nonetheless. But living a life in powerful connection to the death and resurrection. Jesus was on the table. Anyway, but think about the luscious connection there. That they're going through classes, things are being explained to them every day by their priests and by their bishop and so forth during the days. And then the bishop says, on Friday, we're going to remember those who died in the faith into which you have just been baptized. Mm. And the correspondence of that must have made their spine tingles like few other things. That you haven't even dried off from your baptism. And they're talking about dying for this. And that, you need to get clear about that, what a wow. Well, then that gets expanded a little bit later because our first sense of a All Saints feast, if you will, is the Sunday after what we would know now as the Feast of Pentecost. But there are 50 days of Easter, 50 days of unbridled rejoicing in celebration of the resurrection of Jesus from the dead. The 50 days of Easter. And the next Sunday, we're going to celebrate the death and resurrection of those who have given their lives even unto death in witness to the death and resurrection of Jesus. Okay, so in other words, 50 days about the death and resurrection of Jesus, and then the next Sunday is going to be about the death and resurrection of the rest of us, while holding up the martyrs in particular in the first order, and then some others who have given exemplary witness, but who managed to escape burning at the stake or crucifixion or otherwise gruesome death or whatever it might have been. And you see the correspondence between the great 50 days of Easter. By the way, I love that phrase. It's the phrase that every Episcopalian ought to memorize. I mean, we're a pretty bridled bunch. I mean, we play things pretty close to the we play our cards pretty close to the chest most of the time. Ecstatic Episcopalian is generally not in the same sentence. But in the ancient church, that wonderful phrase, 50 days of unbridled rejoicing. Somehow that works into every one of my Easter sermons. Come on, people, take your bridles off.
Yeah.
Come on, people, lighten up. Christ is risen. Deal with it. Anyway, so anyway, you had 50 days of Easter, and then the next thing is this feast of all martyrs, and a few other saints thrown in. Okay, and then it comes along at about the beginning, into the 6th century, beginning of the 7th century. The Pope at the time gets a hold of the Pantheon, the ancient temple in Rome. Many of you who have been to Rome, you probably visited the Pantheon. Pantheon, all gods. It was a temple built to all of the gods. Let's hedge our bets, and cover them all. But the Pope at the time, because it had become by that point a well-established Christian Rome, managed to wrest the Pantheon out of the hands of the leadership and turned it into the Church of St. Mary and the Martyrs. And that took place, on the 13th of May. And now there's a little puzzle there as to why it was the 13th of May. 13th of May that year, which was actually 609. May 13th that year was a Tuesday. Well, Christians don't do things on Tuesday. I mean, Tuesday's the day the Pope sleeps late. So what possibly could it? I mean, Christians do things on Sunday. So you don't take over the Pantheon on a Tuesday. So there are lots of speculation. My own personal speculation is the reason they did it on that Tuesday is because during that same week there was a synod of the Roman bishops. So in other words, all the bishops were in town. So they made an exception on Sunday and had it on Tuesday. But that's only a guess. I mean, I couldn't prove that by fear of death. But of course, that's what this whole thing is about, so go ahead. Anyway, and then about a century later, what happens is that And by the way, just so you know, the Eastern Christian churches, their Feast of All Saints is still the Sunday after the 50 days of Easter. It is still in the spring, in direct relationship with Easter. In the Western Church, about a century after we got the Pantheon, the Pope, which is Gregory III at that point, he built a chapel at St. Peter's in Rome. And now St. Peter's in Rome back in those days was not the St. Peter's, but it's on the same location, right? And he built a chapel there that again he dedicated to St. Mary, to all the martyrs, and he adds to all the saints. And now it's often said, you'll often find in books that happened on November 1st. I think that's a nice story. But I don't think anybody who's actually looked at the data can prove that happened on November 1st. But by tradition, that's when it took place. But it doesn't matter. The result of that happening was that All Saints in the Western Church got named for November 1st, even if that wasn't quite the reason. And it has been November 1st ever since, in the churches of the Western Rite, the churches of the Latin Rite, and those who are sons and daughter churches of that tradition, like us. And so November 1st has been there. There's a curious thing. One of the questions that a lot of us have worried about, and this is just a little aside, is why in the world would we move it from the spring, where it would have some relationship with Easter, to the fall? And it's kind of curious, and frankly, the definitive, undebatable answer to that we do not have. Though I was digging around in some old manuscripts when I was over in Rome, it was probably 10, 12 years ago now, and, you know, if you squint just right, you know, again, you can't prove this, but there are the occasional throwaway sentence or whatever that leads you to believe that what might have been going on here had something very practical. Now, as a liturgical historian, I'll tell you, virtually everything in the history of the liturgy, if you dig deep enough, has a practical orientation. We put layers of catechesis and theological meaning and theological explanations and theological debates about why this is right and that's wrong and da-da-da-da-da. But man, if you keep peeling the layers off long enough, it's generally something pretty practical. Well, the practical thing here was if you have an increasingly big and grand and important feast, and you're having it essentially at the beginning of the planting season in that part of the world, then a lot of you haven't got a lot to feast with. The cupboards are getting torn bare, and the only thing we've got are the winter leftovers. You know, and so having and what you did preserve and what you did keep, you blew at Easter. You know, All Saints be damned. I mean, if we're going to have a feast, it's Easter, All Saints, Easter. Easter's going to win, especially if they're right next to each other, right? So part of the move to November is that's the absolute zenith of their harvest. So that we have actually not just, we can have the Eucharist anytime, but if we're going to have this huge feast, and we are going to remember the martyrs, and we're going to remember the confessors, and we're going to remember all the saints, and we're going to pull out the stops, and we're going to remind ourselves how central the death and resurrection of Jesus is to us, then we've got to do it at a time when everything is plentiful.
That's interesting. That's interesting.
And so we'll see if that, you know, I mean, again, I can't absolutely prove that, but as I say, if you look at the old manuscripts and you see a sentence or two in a sermon that the Pope preached or whatever, you kind of begin to get the impression that this is the practicality here is there's nothing to eat to feast with in May, but by the time we get to November, there's an abundance. Okay, anyway, we'll move on. But anyway, All Saints then becomes that, and as it develops through time, it becomes an incredibly important feast in the church. As a matter of fact, in medieval England, just to pick one out of the, because always, you know, Anglican audiences always like to know what went on in medieval England. But But, you know, it's interesting that there were times in the history of the church from about the 11th century to the Reformation when the church defined 4 principal feasts. And a lot of liturgical books of that period, you know, we have 5 now, principal feasts, you know, the ones that just have to be celebrated, as opposed to the other ones that are of lesser, they're still significant feasts, but are of lesser status. But through that period, the 4 great feasts were Easter, Pentecost, Christmas, and All Saints. And the other ones we think of like, you know, Epiphany, for example. Or we're not, you know, I mean, not that they weren't kept, or that not that they weren't feast or whatever, but what defined our year. I mean, All Saints was one of the feasts that defined the year, along with Christmas and Easter and Pentecost. So anyway, so we got to the Reformation, and the easily talked about the Reformation in reference to All Souls when we get to that. So do you want to talk about All Saints some more?
I do want to talk about All Souls. So when we get to the Reformation, first of all, thank you for letting us and the clergy know that we shouldn't say that All Saints Day was being paired with Halloween. So we now know a lot more, so thank you for that. Once we get to the Reformation, the Church of England drops one of those lesser feasts, drops All Souls from the calendar for all kinds of kind of biblical and Protestant reasons, and then it comes back, and for here at the cathedral, for us, it's come back with real imagination and power. 2 biggest examples being the columbarium is named what? Not All Saints, All Souls. And then 2, the Requiem that we had on November the 2nd, you have a long, well, not long tradition, but for at least a couple of decades, All Souls, the night of All Souls has been a big Eucharist with a lot of music and such. But this history's got a lot of ups and downs. If you give us the ups and downs quickly, and then
I'll do my best.
And then get to the kind of the pathos of All Souls.
Yeah, I mean, the way this first All Souls first begins to develop is in like a lot of things in the history of the liturgy and a lot of things in the history of the church, you scratch away things that the origin tends to be monastic. You know, because the monks had time to sit around and think about this stuff, and then they would influence the parish clergy, and the parish clergy would then kind of pick up on their ideas and whatever. That it were still the same way, but nonetheless. And the earliest that we see in the documents of an All Souls is actually in monasteries where the abbots, particularly of Benedictine monasteries, have said to their people, at the end of the second evensong of All Saints being a really major festival, being a major feast, had 2 evensongs. The evensong that began the feast, which would be after sundown on October 31st, and then the evensong that ended the feast on November the 1st at sundown. Okay? The Eucharist being, in those days, all Eucharists were celebrated during daylight hours, so the Eucharist was in the morning. Okay, the feast itself, in other words, was in the morning. But the abbots would say, at the second evensong, in other words, the evensong that ends the feast of All Saints, please include prayers for your beloved dead. In other words, not just the saints and martyrs,
right,
but for those brothers of the monastery who have died in the last year, for members of the brothers' families, parents, siblings, whatever, who have died in the last year, and particular friends in our local community that support our monastic life. In other words, you know, the tradespeople and farmers and the people who, you know, worked with the monastery in various things. In other words, special prayers after the saints' prayers and special prayers at the second evensong. Well, over time, that practice developed into what we know as All Souls. And because it is on that second evensong is on the hinge between the end of All Saints and on November 1st and November 2nd, November 2nd soon became the Feast of All Souls, or the commemoration of all faithful departed, as we called it in later times. And that continues to grow, and it continues to expand. So you had one day, to celebrate the martyrs and the saints and all those who gave witness to the death and resurrection of Jesus, whose lives we emulate in one way or another, and call us to a deeper level of faithfulness. And because All Saints is little Pascha, because All Saints is little Easter, also help us in the mid-year. I mean, think how long it's been since Easter and how long it's going to be till Christmas. We've got to have a point here in which we give emphasis once again to a major celebration of the resurrection. Not that every Sunday is not one of those two, but that was part of the motivation. Okay, and so these two get established, and things roll along actually pretty well until you sort of get to the Middle Ages. And what happens in the Middle Ages is some of the bishops and priests saw some commercial value in All Souls, and gave a real impetus to stipendiary masses. Have a mass said to spring Aunt Mary from Purgatory. And as the doctrine of Purgatory gets more profoundly developed and whatever, then the stipendiary masses and so forth become all that much more popular and so forth. And of course, when we get to the Reformation, one of the big things that the Reformers go for really quickly is purgatory and stipendiary masses. You don't have to pay for the grace of God.
Yeah.
It comes free and unmerited and whatever. And so obviously then a lot of calendar changes went away, and as the dean said a minute ago, a lot of feasts of the church go by the wayside, at least temporarily. Interestingly enough, in a lot of communities, one of the ones that sticks is All Saints, but almost universally All Souls is just wiped off the map, as are many other feasts too. I mean, All Saints was not the only victim of that reform, shall we say. But when you take something like All Souls out of the calendar, you can take the event off the calendar, but you can't take the pastoral need out of the hearts of the people. So the people still need a way to remember those of their fellowship, and not just the big ones, but their fellowship, who have since last Easter Day entered into the joy of the Lord, as the liturgy used to say. Which, by the way, I saw that was such a wonderful phrase in an earlier All Saints liturgy, that it wasn't all those who have entered into the Lord since last All Saints. It was all those who have entered into the Lord since last Easter Day. They thought about this Easter relationship right through to the end. Anyway, but quickly, in the All Souls. So what happened, because of the pastoral need still being there, in much of Anglicanism, much of Lutheranism, in fact, in many of the traditions that maintain some semblance of liturgical time structures and whatever, they thought, okay, there's still the pastoral need of All Saints, so we will pull All Souls. We will pull that into the All Saints liturgy. And it will be the day that we remember the saints who have gone before us, both those who have names, both those who do not have names, both those whose stories we know, as well as those whose stories we do not know. And we will remember all that, which I think is one of the most big pieces of All Saints, is, I get to contemplate the faithful witness of persons whose story I do not know and whose name I do not know, in the hopes that maybe 500 years from now somebody will be contemplating the fact that nobody can remember anything I did or my name. But that somehow I am still, by baptism, a part of the communion of saints. Okay. Anyway, so the All Saints pastoral need gets worked in, because what do we do in most of Anglicanism worldwide? On All Saints Day, you will have the prayers of the local faithful who have died in the last year included in the intercessions and so forth. So, in other words, it's almost like those monks, add some prayers to All Saints for the local community. And that's the way we did it until, and of course, All Souls never completely went away in Anglicanism. There are always the places where it was kept, sometimes quietly, sometimes privately, sometimes without a lot of falderall, but it was still kind of there. But as the dean has inferred, in recent years, this has become an increasingly important part of our life. Now, there is not a strong doctrine of purgatory, or there's not a bunch of stipendiary masses, but I mean, I can remember, 40 years ago when I became a priest, you had to look hard in any community to find an Episcopal church with an all-soul service. I mean, they were, you could find them if you really worked at it and you were willing to drive 100 miles to the next town, but it was by no means common. Mm-hmm. But now I would say in most metropolitan areas and in many churches across, there is some kind of all souls occasion. As the dean said, it's usually a Eucharist with a memento for the dead, and then generally glorious music. Yeah. A great time to sing some of the great requiems in the history of great sacred music. And it's become an increasingly significant occasion, which frankly I welcome. So.
Mm. I want to thank you for all of that.
It's probably more than you wanted.
No. It's really good. And I'm going to flag one thing just quickly, and we're going to have to move on from it. But another, as Bishop Neal knows, another huge piece that's influenced this All Saints, All Souls Day business are two world wars. And what that did to just the Episcopal Church needing to name right. massive amounts of people who've gone to glory. So there are all kinds of factors in this. And history and reality are always pulling our theology. But I'm going to ask you to take off your historian hat for a moment.
Uh-oh.
And I want you to be speculative with me here for a moment. So one of the things, and I was thinking about this when you're talking about the music of Evensong for All Souls Day. On Tuesday night, in addition to the 4A Requiem, we sang Jerusalem the Golden. And it has this line in it that says, I know not, oh, I know not what joys await us there. There are Episcopal theologians, and I think of somebody like a Catherine Tanner, who when it comes to this sort of resurrection of the dead and the body and heaven, there are Episcopal theologians like Tanner who have a more kind of humble, restrained, non-literal approach. Like let's be careful and not imagine in too much detail what that resurrection body looks like or sounds like. We know not, oh, we know not. There are other Episcopal Anglican theologians like a David Brown who emphasizes to a degree that a Tanner would not, that in the resurrection of the dead and of the body, that there's this continuation of our personal identity to such a degree that heaven is a kind of reunion with those whom we cherish but who went before us. Do you speculate on these on these sorts of questions?
Well, yeah, I yes, I do, because I want to go to heaven, whatever the hell that is. But I'm really clear about the fact I want to go there. No, seriously. I would probably agree with Catherine Tanner to the degree that one of the things that I think deprives us, and I would even probably go so far as to say kills our spirit at times, is this sort of literalism. And I think part of what faith does is transcend literalism. What I am absolutely sure of is that eternal life begins at the font, not at the grave, at the font, and goes on in the full presence of God forever. That, there is no time or place when I am not in the presence of God. There just isn't. And that includes after my physical body has died and the church has prayed its prayers and whatever happens, I am still in every full, intoxicated way in the presence of God. and nothing changes that. So if that's my baseline, then I recognize that some of the images we use for all of this in popular piety and even in theology and in the scriptures and in the hymnal and in the liturgical text of the church and the prayers of the church, some of those images are obviously skirting the historical. Some of them are metaphorical. Some of them are parabolic. Some of them hold up to certain kinds of analysis and scrutiny in a way that some others of them don't. But I have no trouble singing "When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing it will be when we all see Jesus. We'll sing and shout the victory." Oh, I had to finish the line. But now, do I believe every verse of that hymn absolutely, literally? No. But what I do know is that the person who wrote those words that I am quite happy to sing was trying to describe how wonderful it is going to be to spend eternity in the arms of a lover who will never let me go. Some of us probably had to wait till we die to be ecstatic, but nonetheless, but seriously, so I, but because I have that fundamental ground that from the font on, I am totally and fully and with no caveats being held in the arms of God, then I can join with the folks of any age. There are Victorian hymns, there are ancient hymns, there are contemporary hymns, there are all kinds of metaphors and all kinds of stuff, and I can sing and think about all that. Do I literally believe the streets of heaven are paved with gold? I don't know, but it certainly doesn't hurt my imagination to think, well, if I'm going to spend eternity in the arms of God, a little gold wouldn't hurt.
I want to shift us just a little bit one last time before we start to finish up, because the end is in sight. You are and I'll get to this quick because there's a lot I could say about it and we just don't have time, but Neil is a big believer that the Sunday Eucharist is what feeds our imagination, our souls, our bodies. And these things we're talking about are great mysteries, and we don't experience them just once. We certainly don't figure them out in a day or two or even a decade or two. And he uses this word sometimes, this phrase for the liturgy, that the liturgy, the sacraments, the stories of the Scripture sustain us for the long haul. They're for the long haul, all the ups and downs of life. Would you say a little about that?
Yeah, I'll try to be quick, because I know we're running out of time. I think what the dean is pointing to is first of all, I want to say something about the rhythm. We have the liturgical year, we have liturgical seasons, we have it is constantly being interrupted with feast days of various sorts and saints' days of various sorts and all kinds of stuff. And all that's very interesting and all that's very good and all that feeds our soul in their own kind of ways. But what defines us as people of the resurrection is Sunday, which comes around with an incredible regularity. I mean, go down the street and ask any one of your Jewish friends. They've got all kinds of Jewish festivals, all kinds of Jewish customs, all kinds of stuff. But what is the defining characteristic of any good Jew? Sabbath.
Yeah.
Week after week after week after week after week. Well, what is the defining characteristic of Christian life? Sunday, when the community gathers to give public witness to the death and resurrection of Jesus, and to do so by sharing in that feast, which at its core provides the risen life of Christ into our lives, so that we but the point of that rhythm is that it's just relentless. It's just on and on and on and on. I mean, I could tell so many pastoral stories and other kinds of stories about the importance of this, but it's the way we live the weekly rhythm of Christianity, as the dean suggested from stuff I've written, I really do see that as a long haul sort of thing. You know, I mean, I went to this meeting one time, and everybody went around, and they were supposed to tell us, we were supposed to give them the date we were saved or something like that. I don't know. And I said, when they came to me, I said, well, most recently? And they kind of shook their head, and I said, last Sunday. What do you mean last Sunday? You've been a priest for 25 years. How can you have just been saved last Sunday? Well, I said the last time, I received the risen life of Christ and stood with my sisters and brothers who have also been baptized. And with my voice and with my praise and with my singing and with my prayers and with receiving Holy Communion, gave public witness to the death and resurrection of Jesus and received that risen life physically into my body was last Sunday. And guess what, people? I'm going to do it next Sunday, and maybe a few feast days in the meantime too. But it's recognizing that it's the relentlessness of it that shapes us and forms us. That doesn't mean we don't have a big Sunday. That doesn't mean on one particular day the dean preaches a sermon and knocks it out of the park, and you go, oh my God, I think that's the best sermon I've ever heard in my life. It's completely changed. And then the next 14 sermons don't even make sense. Right? But of course they're saving other people. But the point is not this. The point of our Eucharistic life and our Sunday rhythm, are not just these huge moments. It's the relentless rhythm, week in and week out, Sunday after Sunday, hearing the Word of God, singing God's praises, receiving the sacrament of the resurrection, welcoming new people through the death and resurrection of holy baptism, as we will today. I mean, it's the relentlessness that shapes and forms us as the children of God.
That makes me think, as we do wrap up, I mean, one of the things that Katie Broderick and I are often asked by people who are new or visiting is what do I need to do or read to figure this place out? And I can't speak for Katie and Broderick, but I bet I know what they say, and I know what I say, which is just come on Sundays. I mean, if you want to figure this place out, there's not a book in the world that's going to figure it out like coming on Sundays. And that's true for us who have been at home here for decades. I mean, it's Sundays is where it's at. And it's just a privilege then to gather here with all of you, and especially with you, Neil. It's great to be with you again. I thank you for your, I know you don't want or necessarily need to hear this. You've got a lot of knowledge, but it's your wisdom that matters the most. So thank you for that. Thank you for all of you who came. It means the world that you're here today. I'm going to end us just a little bit early today because obviously we've got a lot to get ready for at 10:30. But if you've got another question for Bishop Neil, he'll linger in here for just a few minutes, and you can come up and ask it. God bless you. All who are joining us online, please know you're welcome to join us for the service as well, which will be streamed at 10:30 a.m. at this same website, sjcathedral.org. Take care.
Bless you, sir.